Hey guys, we're going to be talking today about frozen pipes and all you need to know about frozen pipes in the winter. My name is Nate and this is Joel. Hopefully you guys know us, but we'll be your guides for these maintenance videos. Alright, really important. This whole video only applies to the time of the year when temperatures are really, really cold. So this is in January and February. Outside of that, this will never happen. Okay, so here we're in the bathroom. Before we do anything, I wanted to kind of talk to you about the anatomy of some plumbing lines. So what happens in the winter in the Northeast, it gets so cold that a lot of plumbing lines freeze. Joel, can you walk us through these lines and what we're looking at so you can...
Yeah, at every sink and toilets, you always have water lines. The sinks are going to be hot and a cold, and the bathroom is the toilet is always going to be a cold. So it's going to have shut-offs at each one typically, and if you do not have heat in the house, it's going to always freeze up in these lines, and it's typically at this point here or in the wall. So you want to shut it off either here or in the basement, and before you do any other work.
They both freeze, or could one freeze, or what?
Typically, the cold line freezes quicker, but if there is no heat source in the house, the hot line will actually freeze just as quickly.
Right, and what, the hot doesn't freeze as fast because it's hot water, so it takes colder temperatures for it to actually freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
So most times tenants will call in, and the big issue is the water's not flowing enough or at all. And a good way to prevent this, if it is actually has some kind of flow, is turning the water on to even a drip on both sides, so that it's constantly pressure building and pushing the other water through, so you never freeze it directly, because once the current's going, it won't. It's almost like a effect of keeping it from freezing in one place. So you want to have it tell the tenant to let the water on. It doesn't have to be full blast, just a good steady flow on either side, so it doesn't back up the lines.
Okay. All right, I got grabbed Autumn. She's going to help out with some scenarios. This is why. So tenants are going to call in with frozen pipe problems, and that's what the troubleshooting guide is there for. You don't need to just wing it. When someone calls in, pull up your troubleshooting guide, and it will walk through all the different scenarios and what you should say. But I thought me and Autumn would just go through a couple. So Autumn, give me one kind of general scenario that you might call in and be asking about. What?
Having no water.
Right, so tenant calls in and says you have no water. So that when a tenant calls in and has no water, it could be a bunch of things, right? It could be what the water is never turned on.
Right, you didn't pay your bill.
Right. So one of the things I would ask or want to know is, did the tenant just move in? If the tenant just moved in, then it's probably like a water not being turned on to the property. But normally one of my first questions would be is, when did the water stop working? And then you're going to find out. So when did the water stop working, Autumn?
Probably this morning.
This morning
I haven't
when
had
you
it all
woke up?
day.
And then another thing I'd like to ask is, do you have water anywhere else? Is it, you don't have water anywhere in your house, or just in one of the sinks?
I don't know, let me go check. I don't have any. Nope, no water.
Yeah. Well, normally that doesn't happen. Normally you don't lose water everywhere. Normally it'll be one fixture that goes first. So if you can kind of isolate it to one fixture, then you know it's probably something at that fixture. The next thing you want to ask is, hey Autumn, is it cold in your area? And Autumn, is it cold? It's really cold. And you shouldn't really even have to ask that. You should know what the temperature is in the area that the people that your region is. But if the temperature is below 32 degrees for 48 hours and they don't have water in a fixture, then you know it's probably frozen pipes. Another thing to say is, Autumn, are you saying you don't have any water coming out, or are you saying you don't have any hot water?
Hot water.
Oh, so you do have some water coming out.
Yes. It's like a little drip. It's not a lot.
Okay, but so that's a good thing to clarify, because sometimes tenants say they don't have any water, but they really mean they don't have any hot water. But it's also good to note that when pipes freeze, sometimes they just lose their cold water, or just lose their hot water. Normally it'd be just they're cold, but if one of the two is not working, that's also a really good sign that it is frozen pipes. And then oh, that's good. So ultimately, kind of what you're trying to do when someone calls in is figure out what the problem is. And what we really want to avoid doing is, if it is a frozen pipe problem, we want to address it as a frozen pipe problem and not call the utility company and try to get the water turned on because we think the water got turned off. Because if you can address it or diagnose it correctly from the beginning, it's going to save a lot of time and money getting billed to the owner. Okay, good.
Another area to look at is when tenants are calling in and saying that their toilet is not filling up. That always tells that the water supply line is frozen or the line going to the toilet is frozen. So that's another thing that you might get that comes in from a tenant or a meld. So that is another scenario you want to watch out for.
All right, and then lastly, unfortunately, a lot of times there's just nothing we can do to unfreeze the line. We'll send a tech out, we'll try to add some heat to the area, but sometimes that just isn't gonna unfreeze the line. So tenants get really upset, they freak out, but sometimes at the end of the day, we just have to wait for the temperature to warm up outside. And tenants will yell, but we'll do the best we can. Sometimes we can deliver them water, we can bring out gallons of water for them, they can use that to fill up their toilets, they can use it at their sink. But sometimes they just gotta deal with it. It's one of the uglier situations or tougher things to work through as a property management company. So it normally happens once or twice a year where we have really cold weather. It should be coming up soon. And then the last thing I wanna just mention, all these scenarios were kind of under the assumption that there's a tenant occupying the property. We have even bigger problems when it's vacant and the oil runs out, or for whatever reason the heat turns off in the house and then pipes start freezing. And we don't even realize the pipes froze until it starts warming up, and then they unfreeze, but once they froze, the pipes crack, and then we start seeing water going all over the place. So I'm not gonna get into that other than to say, if someone calls and says there's water pouring out of a pipe somewhere because it broke, that's when we do need to call a plumber. But that's kind of a whole different scenario, and that might be another video that we talk about. All right, thanks.
Go ahead.
So once you've identified it as a frozen pipe issue, now we need to figure out what we do. What is our response? And Joel's the expert on this, so Joel will talk us through what we do once we've identified the pipes as being frozen.
Okay, there's usually two different scenarios. It's unoccupied versus occupied. If a tenant calls in, it's obviously occupied. Most of the case where the pipes are freezing are either because they're turning the heat down at night, or they don't have heat, or there's an insulation issue on one of the lines going up to the first or second floor. In this scenario, you'd actually want to actually send a maintenance technician rather than a plumber. That's always the first person you send out, because you're going to want to send a plumber. You don't need to send a plumber unless the lines are actually broken. So you would send a maintenance tech out with space heaters and put them in the areas that don't have water flowing, and that should heat up the pipes enough to bring the water back up to temperature. If it's the second part of that, where the tenant is either turning the heat down or don't have heat, an HVAC tech needs to go out immediately for the no heat. And then the second one is we have to let the tenant know that they have to keep the heat on the same temperature all through the night and during the day.
All right, so maybe we need to put a space heater under a cabinet, under a kitchen cabinet or something like that.
Yeah, because a lot of times they'll be on an exterior wall that doesn't have insulation.
Don't call a plumber to come out for frozen pipes. There's really nothing a plumber can do. Two, we need to get heat in that area. So we need to so you want to put a meld in and have a tech get scheduled to take space heaters out or whatever they need to do. Somehow we need to get more heat to that area of the house. There might be heat. Okay, so what will happen is, as Joel said, sometimes pipes will freeze. I want to I guess let me back up. If the temperatures are below 32 degrees, obviously that's when pipes start to freeze. But it normally needs to get considerably colder than that. It normally needs to get down into the like lower 20s and be in the lower 20s for 24 to 48 hours straight for pipes to start freezing. It's not just pipes can freeze when the heat's on in the house as well. Sometimes pipes will freeze just because the water line goes through an exterior wall and that might not be insulated, so it can freeze in the wall. Here, cut it.